we'll start our discussion with the muscles that move the arms with the Latissimus Dorsi. We'll refer to it as the lats from here on out. So this is a massive muscle whose origin covers kind of a lot of terrain here on the posterior side of the body. Its origin is at the spinous process of the thoracic, so T7, all the way down to L5. So it crosses about half of the thoracic all the way down the lumbar spine. Its origin is also at the iliac crest, the inferior ribs, and the inferior angle of the scapula. So it's this massive kind of sheet of muscle. And that's just its origin. It inserts into the bicipital groove and not quite at the humeral head, but just below it here at the humerus bone. So it kind of goes through to the side and inserts here at the front. So this muscle, you can kind of touch or palpate it just underneath your armpit. It's this muscle here that you can kind of grab onto. Now, as it goes deeper and inserts into the humerus bone, you really wouldn't be able to feel it. And the muscle certainly gets a lot thinner as it kind of crosses more of the back here. But it's a nice place for you to feel it if you kind of reach your arm forward and plug your arm bone back. You can kind of grab hold of that muscle. And it's also nice to see how it affects the upward rotation of your arms. So if we've got its insertion here and its origin back here, and we were to bring these together to contract or to strengthen them, let's think of some of the directions that might pull the humerus bone. So it will pull it into extension. And it's a big mover when we think of the arm being over the head, being able to draw the arm down and extend it behind you. You're using your lats when you do that. So if its insertion is here and its origin is on the posterior side and it contracts and draws it together, you can imagine that it would adduct the arm. And because it inserts at the front of the humerus, we could also imagine these 2 points here, the inferior angle of the scapula and the humerus bone. If those were to contract, it would internally rotate that humerus bone. So it does quite a lot of things there. So we can see as it's pulling the arm bone down and going to extend it behind you, it draws the head of the humerus bone into the socket there. Now, this is the only muscle that goes from the arm bone to the pelvis. So in that way, you can think of it coordinating a lot of our movements. Let's think of some postures where we might really use the lats. So upward facing dog, we could think of. Now, I know it can get confusing with the arm bones. I would never cue to internally rotate your upper arm bones because I feel like I would get a lot of this from students. But in fact, there's a slight internal rotation in order to kind of neutralize the arm bone, similar to how we might suggest the same in Paschimottanasana, even though the legs are straight and we're not asking for this deep internal rotation. The thigh bones, the femur bones slightly internally rotate there to kind of neutralize the thigh bone and the hip socket. So it's very similar with that in upward facing dog. So we've got a slight internal rotation of the humerus bone. We've got the arms adducting together. Now, even though we're not extending the arms behind us in upward facing dog, there's this action of pushing down through the hands and pulling the chest through. So there's an isometric contraction there of the Latissimus Dorsi. So also those rhomboids are working to retract the shoulder blades, but this is a great posture where we've got kind of all three of those actions happening. So the lats are really helping facilitate this kind of pulling through of the chest. Another great way to show the Latissimus Dorsi working is thinking through the transition of downward facing dog to plank. So I talked earlier about how the Latissimus Dorsi really work when the arms are over the head and they're working to bring the arm back into extension. So if we think of downward facing dog, arms over the head, and what's that transition we do so often? Going into plank pose. So pulling the arms into extension, and then the lats are there to help kind of draw the head of the humerus bone into the shoulder socket. So that's another great example. Reverse tabletop is another good one. So, working the back body to push and lift the chest up as the arms are extended behind us. And again, we don't want this internal rotation, but as we go down, there's a slight drawing in, adducting, a slight internal rotation to kind of neutralize those arm bones. Again, not to be confused with this. Now, in terms of stretching this massive muscle, remember we've got this massive origin. If we lift the arm over the head and take a side bend, we're getting into a nice part of the origin here. The insertion, remember up here at the humerus bone, we're getting a nice stretch of the lats. So your reverse warrior or any pose you want to take, adding in a side bend or even just standing side bend, is going to get into those lats. Puppy stretch is another great pose because remember, if the lats primary role or one of them is to extend the arm behind, then if we flex the arm in front of us, that's going to do the opposite action. Plus we have that nice pressure, so that's going to stretch the lats. Now the lats and the triceps, which we'll talk about later, also kind of get slightly involved with each other. So if we were to bend the arms, we'd be stretching the triceps and the lats there in our puppy stretch. So sometimes adding in those different variations to kind of really articulate what you're stretching can be useful.